Today's episode has been brought to you by popular request. During the summer, we asked our listeners if there were any topics they'd like us to cover in future episodes, and menopause came up again and again. And to be honest, it's one I've shied away from a little bit because it's something I don't know much about. But a quick chat with you, Claire, told me this is absolutely something we need to cover in relation to Pilates.
And it really is, Sophie, because we are still in the Pilates industry teaching mainly women. Okay, so I believe, have a responsibilities in the Pilates community to serve the women at all stages of their life and have some knowledge of what's happening for them physiologically and how Pilates could help in certain ways and things we might want to avoid for them in other ways at other times in life. So pregnancy, for example, we can't have women lie flat on their back, for example. So it's just the same in menopause. We want to be informed. So our studio, for example, we actually have a menopause specialist. So Sarah has done some advanced training to specialize in Pilates for menopause. So she has lots of experience with that.
Brilliant, brilliant. So before we start, I'd really like to define what menopause actually is. It's something we hear about, but I'm not sure about the definition. So until it's upon us, I think it's perhaps something we don't think about very much. So a quick look on the NHS website tells me quite simply that menopause is when your periods stop due to lower hormone levels, which usually happens between the ages of 45 and 55, but can sometimes happen earlier. And you actually reach menopause when you've not had a period for 12 months. And we know that menopause and perimenopause, which is when you have symptoms of menopause before your periods stop, can cause symptoms like anxiety, mood swings, brain fog, hot flushes, and irregular periods. And those symptoms can start years before your periods stop and carry on afterwards.
Wow.
It's great being a woman, isn't it?
Fantastic.
Those symptoms can have a really big impact on your life for many years, can't they? It can affect relationships, work, how you feel about yourself. And that said, there are things we can do to help those symptoms. We know that there's medicines you can take to replace the missing hormones. But from what I've read and what I believe from having practiced Pilates, I'm sure there's plenty we can do to help ourselves. So tell me about where Pilates comes into the picture.
So it's really interesting. I almost want to circle back to what you were saying about us not knowing until it's happening. Yeah. And isn't that the case with so many things that we don't know until it's upon us, which is where Pilates and even us having this conversation where it's not something we've experienced yet. And yet many of our listeners have gone through menopause, are going through menopause, and we want to make sure that we reach them just in the same way as a studio owner. I want to make sure that I can support women going through the menopause, and conversation is actually where it starts. Right. And in our setup that we have here, we've created a community environment, an open environment where people can ask questions. And what's absolutely beautiful is when one person has had an experience, they can share it with somebody else. And there's a relief, or there's a little bit of empowerment there because somebody knows they're not alone. And I was listening over the summer to an amazing interview with a woman. This was on BBC Radio Scotland, and they were interviewing a woman who created a charity called the Menopause Cafe. So I'll make sure we put the link into our show notes so that people can look into this, because what she was identifying as being a really big missing piece in the care for women through menopause is just places to have conversation. So with the Pilates class, yes, we're here to do Pilates. There's no shadow of a doubt. It's also for a lot of people with any physiological change that's happening for them, it's the first place they're interacting with themselves, going through that change. And so it stimulates the opportunity to converse about that.
You're so right. You're so right. Because I think about some of the classes I've done, and it might be there's women that have come quite regularly, And it feels like quite a safe space, actually, doesn't it? To have those conversations. There's women who are quite similar, and we might talk about things like that. I've been in classes where people have talked about perhaps their brain fog.
Yep.
And maybe how, oh, I'm struggling tonight, but you know, my brain feels quite foggy trying to get through the choreography of this movement or something like that.
And so we've had situations where when somebody's having a hot flush, they know that they're going through a phase of hot flushes, and they just bring a little cool pack, or we get a flannel that's cool so that they got some comfort for themselves in that experience. And it's a flash, it comes and then it goes, and then we move on. We're not going to make a big hoo-ha about it, but we're going to support them through that.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the actual physical Pilates piece, which for all women at all stages of life is super, super important, because it's building bone density, it's using all of your body from the inside out. There is nothing left to untouched, as it were, by the exercises that we do. And it's not like, you know, Sarah's done this amazing training and she's our menopause specialist, and we're also not separating women with menopause from any other women.
Yeah, you're not putting them all in it. You don't have the menopause Pilates class.
No,
yeah.
Everybody needs Pilates. It's just their needs in themselves change. The Pilates doesn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I can really relate to that from the classes that I've done. And you know what? It feels quite relentless sometimes, doesn't it, as a woman, really? And I'm thinking particularly for someone like me who had children later on in life. So you've got your hormones just finished surging after pregnancy, and then you've got your perimenopause to look forward to. And one of the things that's playing on my mind is like, how long have I got until I start to experience it? And you might have symptoms that are possibly more premenstrual, and you're wondering, well, oh, is this it? Is this it? Am I starting with symptoms? And I've read somewhere about family history, and that can be the most accurate way to predict when you might experience that change. So it might be the same age that your mother did, or if you've got sisters, it could be genetically linked. So for me, I'm hoping.
You're hoping for that, are you?
It's about 5 years off. But which feels like a relief. But there's other factors coming into play there. And I know that, because I read about this, that you can't delay menopause.
No.
But from your experience, is there anything we can do to ensure we don't speed it up?
Yeah, so there's a few things there just to unpack. So like, you know, I'm seeing a lot more now with the women that I work with, that they're going straight from postnatal with me into perimenopause, because we're having our babies a little bit later. We've talked about this before, and that can be a really confusing time, because maybe you're stopping breastfeeding and then periods just don't come back because you're going straight into it.
Oh, it's so unfair, doesn't it?
It's a lot.
Yeah. But you're right. I think I read recently, and I can't remember the exact age, but the average age for a first child is certainly early 30s now.
Oh, yes, it is. It's in the early 30s, without a doubt. And so that has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? And we are definitely seeing that more. And then the other thing is about, you know, the predictors, like you're hoping, because presumably you've got a family member who had an easier menopause experience. Yeah. And so that's great. It's also not necessarily in reality.
Oh,
I hate it when I disappoint you, because you are a different person. Your experiences in the world, you were doing marathons, the sort of Pilates exercise that you've done diligently for a number of years now. So everything that we have done in our bodies and the experiences we've had in our bodies absolutely will influence exactly how your body comes into the menopause. So it doesn't matter whether or not somebody in your family had this smooth, easy ride through the menopause, or equally somebody in your family maybe had a really rough time, doesn't mean necessarily that's going to be you. Because what's your diet like? Where do you live in the world in relation to that person? Because our entire body, right down to a cellular level, is being influenced by everything in our environment. Everything we do, everything we consume is influencing our body. So whether it comes to menopause or recovering from a hip replacement, it's going to be different for everyone.
That's so interesting, because I think, and we need to do an episode on this one as well, I think there are stories that get passed down in families, aren't there?
Definitely.
That, oh, well, this is what happened for me, somebody's mum might say, and therefore you'll probably go down that path too. And I know, speaking from sort of personal experience, I look quite like my mum. We had similar births. We started periods at similar ages. So some of the genetics are clearly there, unless it's just a heavy
genetics, and we cannot ignore that. And I don't want to sound as if I'm denying genetics, because 100% that's an influential factor, and so is the environment and everything else.
Okay, so talking about the environment and what you can do, you mentioned a couple of things that are really positive things that made me feel quite happy that I've done, like running and practice Pilates for years. What can a woman do? And obviously they're not delaying the menopause, but to try and not speed it up, or maybe to lessen the symptoms that they might have, or the experience.
So there's great studies now that actually show that a woman who exercises does have an easier time through menopause. It helps manage a lot of the symptoms. So anxiety is one that comes up a lot for people. And there's, in Pilates specifically, there's a lot of studies that have shown how much improvement people can have, men and women, getting through their anxiety symptoms by doing Pilates, because we have the opportunity to have control over our breath, we have control over our movement, we're coordinating both sides of the brain. You know, the brain fog, which you mentioned a couple of times, I mean, the brain fog is real. And for some people, you know, just going back to the people who have their babies and then go straight into menopause or perimenopause, and we talk about pregnesia, where you're in that pregnesia fog, and then they just go straight from the pregnesia fog into the perimenopause fog. It's very, very real to people. And it's a sense, you know, from the many women that I worked with who've said it's like being outside of yourself. You know, you can see that you're not seeing. And so when you're doing Pilates, there's such a lot of coordinated movement where you're having to access multiple spheres of your brain at the same time. So that is stimulating. It's like puzzles, and anything where you've got to be creative, you've got to use both sides of your brain. So it is marvelously helpful for that, because most people come to Pilates, menopause or not, and they're like, oh, I've got to concentrate really hard, or I've totally forgotten about my day, or I can't think about my to-do list, because you're so busy concentrating on the movement experience in your body, and that distracts you from the other things.
That's really interesting, because there's two things. And the first is just to mention, I often have quite a lot of ideas.
You're creative.
It stimulates like a creative flow when I might have been in a bit of a fog in the day, perhaps, like you're just going through the day and the thoughts aren't there. And I get the same actually from running as well. I sometimes get ideas, but definitely with Pilates, it unleashes that to an extent. But then there's something you always say in classes about, come on, let's engage the grey matter.
I love to say that, because I think that we can forget how much we in movement are stimulating the grey matter that we are, and it's important to, and especially going through the stages of menopause.
And it's something about Pilates that, until you said that, and I can remember you saying it really early on in class, hadn't really occurred to me, because Pilates felt primarily physical.
Okay, I forget, you see, because to me it's everything. So it's energetic medicine, it is the mind, body, it's absolutely everything.
You forget, I came to Pilates for a good bath.
I know, I mean, yes, and many people we'll begin with that in mind, that it is something, that it's exercise.
Or to grow a bit taller, or to just elongate your limbs, just to look.
Of course you're going to get all of those things,
Yeah.
but you're only going to get those things if your mind is engaged with your body.
Yeah. And I think that's something like almost like a secret of Pilates that you perhaps wouldn't think about if you hadn't experienced it, or if you didn't stand back and think about the class that you'd just done, or someone like you didn't point it out in the class.
I do like to point it out.
And I also want to pick up on what you said about anxiety. I've spoken to so many people recently who've told me they're experiencing some symptoms of anxiety and they're struggling with it. And I think perhaps it's maybe the age of the people that I'm friends with is part of it. Some of it will be perimenopause. Some of it is post-COVID for sure. I do think some of the impacts are only just being
they're coming out
now for sure. You know, we're leaving our houses, we're going to do things that we haven't done in quite a long time, and people are feeling quite anxious about that. And you said something to me the other week. You can't remember because you're looking at me. That when you're feeling anxious about something, you need to say, what evidence do I have to support this?
Yes,
that's right. And it's is it true? And just saying that I found really helpful. So I just wanted to share it with listeners on the podcast, because I thought
that's a great tip, actually.
So let's just cycle back. So if you're feeling anxious about something, you're worrying about something or ruminating. I'm a real ruminator sometimes, and you end up going down that path. You ask yourself,
and you're pausing with the thought of a specific situation, and so you're then asking yourself, is there evidence that what I'm thinking about this situation, is there evidence of that? Is it true? Because so often what's happening is that the ruminating, as you say, this is all what's happening in our head. And then when we have an opportunity to come together in community, and like in a Pilates class, then you're finding those opportunities to dispel that, to go, oh no, it's not true. It's not only me, or it doesn't have to be that way for me. So you might be thinking about menopause occurring for you in a certain way. And then you meet all these other women in class and they go, oh, it was this for me, or it was that for me, or it was this for me. And it's all completely different variations on the theme. So there's no evidence to prove that you would be a certain way.
And the other thing is, I was saying I got ideas. I also get clarity in classes. Sometimes you get that clarity of being rational.
Yes. And so one of the things that happens when because everybody knows Pilates is great for your posture. So when you get your forward head back on top of her spine. So those of you not watching on YouTube, Sophie did immediately bring her head back on top of her spine and roll her shoulders and get herself better. But what happens is, when you've elongated your spine, when you've come into the center of your body and found more balance, the cerebral spinal fluid is able to flow more freely. So it gives literal clarity to your thinking and your mind.
The what spinal fluid?
The cerebral spinal fluid, brain fluid.
Right.
Ability to think.
It is like
so.
That. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I remember.
It's not just me thinking, oh, I have a bit of time out and I can think again. There is an actual.
So I remember a few years ago, there was a leading political figure, shall we say, whose posture was shocking because her head was forward, her shoulders were rounded, and I couldn't stop shouting at the television, thinking, how on earth are you going to leave the country when you're not going to be able to think straight?
Because dancing that.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So anyway, it really, really, really does make a difference.
By that, because don't think that that's something people would associate with Pilates, that if you've got anxiety or you're experiencing some of those perimenopausal symptoms, that you can come to class. And actually, it's going to really help with that.
Yeah. And so some of the tricks that I do is, one of my tips, and I actually have given it to you before.
Go on.
Is the standing against the wall.
Yes.
Because the standing against the wall, she's doing it now, folks, doing it now. So head against the wall, shoulders against the wall, back of your pelvis, but your heels can be a little bit forward, otherwise the
floor's creaking.
Yeah, so we're all good with that. So your head, shoulders, pelvis is against the wall. And then not only are you bringing your head into alignment with the rest of your body so you can breathe, so your diaphragmatic systems are more aligned, which means that you can breathe more freely and easily. You've got the cerebral spinal fluid flowing, so you've got clarity in your thoughts and in your mind. And then also your brain has got feeling of the back of your body, which we don't have such a good sense of. You don't feel the back of your body as well as we feel our front body. Our front, we see it.
Yeah.
We look at it,
Yeah.
we can touch it easier than we can touch our back. And when you feel the back of your body, it helps to switch you into the parasympathetic nervous system.
What?
So you've got like stress out central in your sympathetic nervous system.
Yes.
And then you've got your rest and digest, and I'm calm and I can deal with anything the world throws at me. And that's your parasympathetic, which that sensory awareness in the back of your body will help stimulate. So it helps to,
So I need the parasympathetic.
So we all need it. And don't get me wrong, it's important that we understand that both are important. We need to be able to react when somebody pulls out the junction in front of us. We need to get out of that again, so we don't stay in the stress.
And I think that's the thing from people that I've spoken to, and I'm definitely experienced it, where you go into that mode.
Yeah.
And you don't pull out.
No, you're just in it.
And then your whole body, and shoulders up at ears.
And I can imagine, and of course I haven't had this experience, I can imagine that women who are going through menopause, they're in the working world, having to continually keep up and rise to the challenges that we're faced as we're in the working world. And then to be feeling the experiences that you are going through the menopause and having to keep up, you're going to be in that more stressed out state. Make logical sense.
It does. And so there's things that you can do to negate those.
Exactly.
So just talking about the working world, someone I used to work with used to talk about our surges, which were our hot flushes. Yeah, she was brilliant. She was brilliant. And I know a few friends who are experiencing perimenopausal symptoms have had some concerns about, well, what if I have a hot flush in class or a surge? You know, as a teacher, how can you be sensitive to the needs of women in class? Because I was thinking about this, and it's not like an injury where you might say, oh, I've hurt my ankle, I've done this, I've done that. And that seems quite straightforward because it's physical, you can see, and you might just alert you teach to that being in the class. But best will in the world, I'm not going to put my hand up and say, I might have a hot flush in this class, or or I'm struggling a bit sweaty.
That makes me so sad though, because actually, it goes in line with the pelvic health work that I do. I want us to create an environment where, like in our little studio here, and then it can drift out and ripple out, where it's just like, of course you just tell the teacher that you're having hot flushes. Why wouldn't you? That if you're going to tell them that you've had a stressful day or that you went over your ankle, it's a physiological thing that's happening. Why on earth wouldn't you say? And it's because there's a cultural shift that's not quite fully happened yet about talking about these things and just saying, and that it's okay that a teacher can be informed. So all of our teachers would be informed to be able to support a woman with anything that's going on with them. Whether it's, I've had a stressful day, I need to just do this type of exercise today, or don't talk to me because I've just had an argument with somebody, or it's the kids have stressed me out, or I've just found out I'm pregnant, or sprained ankle, whatever it is, we can support them. So if it was power surge, that is great. I think we should trademark it or something. So if a woman is having a power surge, I wouldn't, so the teacher wouldn't necessarily know, because not all women sweat visibly with a power surge. So it might not be obvious that that's the case.
Yeah.
I would be asking at the beginning of a class anyway, everybody, and going to make sure that they could say to me that there's, you know, if something was going on. And like I said earlier, if somebody was having a power surge, they might need to pause and sit up for a moment if we're lying on our back, because that can increase the heat, whatever. And maybe a little cool cloth or something that they might know to bring. We've had lots of times, we've had people with the hand fans. Little like battery operated hand fans, and you just have that nearby.
What about like surging hormones? Because I think you've identified that in me actually before, where you do something and suddenly in the class you feel a bit dizzy. But it's funny because the week before you did it and you're absolutely fine.
Yeah, and it's changeable. We are different every moment of every day. So we like to compare ourselves to the last time we did footwork on the reformer. And then today it feels different, and we somehow wrong ourselves. So what happens is you're doing the reformer and you're like, oh, what have I done wrong? Because it feels different. Instead, it's a switch in mindset and internal dialogue about, okay, I feel different today. Is there any evidence to support that I'm doing this wrong? No, there isn't. It's just a new day. It's warmer today, or I've been busier today, or there's a change in my hormones, so my blood pressure might be different today. And accepting where we are on any given day and nurturing ourselves there. You know, talk a lot about giving ourselves grace, because we do berate ourselves terribly, don't we? Not menopause, you know, just in life. So just giving ourselves grace to be different that day.
Or there's that very English, you know, put up and shut up. You know, we're not going to talk about it, because the one thing I wanted to ask you, and I know you're going to probably this, is sometimes I wonder, and I can't be alone, is the teacher just thinking it's a real nuisance when people are going on at the beginning of the class? Various ailments.
The list.
And so, I know you're saying, oh, well, you would say that, but I'm actually really conscious at the beginning of the class that unless I've probably broken something or...
So our role primarily is to help. And if you held something back, that actually something we do could, you know, we could teach you, could help, then we would want to do that. Equally, if you had osteoporosis, for example, and you just had a diagnosis of that, we could do things to make it worse. So there's a big old responsibility there, that we know and we have that information so that we can support you where you are. And what's really interesting, and I just had this conversation with a group of Pilates teachers very recently, that people hold back mega important information all the time. Like double hip replacement, knee replacement, vaginal surgery, abdominal surgery, shoulder, like things that are hugely important. Everything is important. Everything in your body that has happened to you your entire life is part of the map and the story that influences what you do, how you achieve what you do, and the benefits of what you do. And, you know, so recently I had somebody that had a scoliosis and she didn't say that she had a scoliosis. I've had many women who've had pelvic organ prolapse and not told me, oh, well, that's not relevant. Everything is relevant. Everything. So we want to know. No, so it's not a nuisance. Never a nuisance.
So I want to pick up on that. You talked about pelvic health.
Oh, yes. It's hard for me not to talk about pelvic health.
I know. Can that be impacted by perimenopause, by menopause? Because I was wondering about how, for example, a weakened pelvic floor might present in class or everyday life.
She's gesturing me to just go. I mean, I winced a little bit there when you said weakened. Because the pelvic floor, which is not a floor because it's not hard and flat, it's got holes in it. I might have said that once or twice before. So diaphragm, it's more like a back than it is a floor. So anyway, it isn't weak, it's just imbalanced. However, what happens where if a woman has a birth injury, for an example, so that would be an episiotomy or a tear, as few examples, and their pelvic floor, their pelvic diaphragm feels pretty fine. There's no like major issues. Maybe there's an occasional leak when they're on a trampoline, but it's nothing that they're feeling terribly bothered by.
I'm nodding.
And then they get to menopause, and because of the hormonal changes, that your tissue everywhere becomes less juicy. Okay. So when it's less juicy, it doesn't have the same lift and resiliency and springy backness that it might have done in your 20s and 30s. So when it doesn't have that springy juiciness, it means that an injury that happened 20 years before, say, can present a little bit of a problem, like a prolapse or just regular incontinence or pain. And the assumption is often made that that's specifically menopause and it's specifically a weakness, and it still isn't. It's just an imbalance that needs to be worked on differently. So it can be the imbalance could have been there, but it's been like dormant, if you like. And then menopause comes, hormones change, and then we get symptoms.
And what about the people that haven't had a child? Could that in perimenopause or menopause, would their pelvic health be impacted by, say, an injury or something like that?
For sure. So it's amazing how many people have had injuries or surgeries that can affect their pelvic health. So if you ever fell on your bum and broke, dislodged, angled your coccyx bone off to one side or the other, that you see, I mean, you're a miracle, but we need to get on it before menopause properly gives you, right? So that can create, because that's an injury to the musculature around, because your pelvic floor attaches to your tailbone, to your coccyx bone at the end of your spine. So it's been affected by that injury. If you've had a hip replacement, if you've had any kind of abdominal surgery, if you've had vaginal surgery of any sort whatsoever, then that can affect it too. So it's not isolated to women who've had babies.
Okay. So I feel like I need to sit down now. That is a lot. That's a lot of information that just came out there. And it's interesting because it's that idea of future proofing, isn't it?
So important
to say, actually, this, I might be okay now. I might be getting away with it, if you like.
Yeah.
But wham.
Yeah.
Perimenopause might come, and suddenly those things that were dormant might start to come into play. So one of the things that you also mentioned earlier on, and I know one of the things can happen with perimenopause over a longer period of time, is bones weakening. Yeah. And
they don't weaken either.
Oh, come on, correct me and I'll carry on.
No, you go.
Okay. So that it's really worrying to me about that idea of losing strength and mobility. And there's obviously action we can take to combat that through diet or perhaps vitamin D. But how can a regular Pilates practice help?
Yeah, and definitely the research is supporting vitamin D as a supplement for bone density. So there's an age that a woman reaches, 50 something, I think, depends on family history, where they can have a DEXA bone density scan.
Okay,
so
yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So it used to be called like brittle bone disease, you know, where and you'll remember that, and really all osteoporosis or osteopenia, which is the pre-osteoporosis, all it is that the bone density is reduced, so it's more fragile. And the bone density can, you know, when somebody is osteopenic, so not at osteoporosis but osteopenic, you can go back and you can build the bone, so you can you can work on, I'm not going to go into the science bit of it, but you can work on increasing bone density.
It's not lost.
It's not lost. And Pilates is amazing to build bone density. So the action that we need to do is weight bearing on the tissues that load the bone. So that doesn't mean just things like obvious stuff like a push-up.
Yeah.
It also means stretching and things that pull on you that you then are resisting.
Like spring wall or reformer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's pulling you and you're pulling back, and that's creating the load and force through the tissue that is going to be able to create that bone. It's hard to make it really simple to explain, but hopefully that's...
Because you think Pilates exercise, it's like muscle. How would you recreate that bone?
Well, because so everywhere in your body where there's a bony bit, so like feel the front of your pelvis, feel that bony sticky out bit,
Yeah.
that's a hook. So all over our body, we've got little hooks, those bony prominences, those sticky out bony bits. They're everywhere, and some of them you can't feel, but all of those bones are where the connective tissue that is the sleeve that your muscles are in attaches to. So imagine a sleeve with a muscle, big chunky belly in it. The sleeve hooks on to all of those places everywhere. So where it hooks on, it pulls.
Yeah, okay. Do you know, I'm just thinking back to a really earlier episode, the learning the lingo.
Oh yeah, we need to go do another one.
Something really interesting to me, because I was about to ask you, oh, do I need to learn about anatomy then? And then I remembered you saying, no, you need to learn about you.
Yes, it's so important. And just the hands-on feeling your own, where are your collarbones and feeling where they are. And, I think knowing you goes deeper than just feeling the bones. Back to what you were saying about future-proofing. How are we going to know if something has changed if we haven't noticed and checked what it's like, what we feel like, what we are like in advance? So for example, it's regular practice. You see it in like changing rooms and stuff like that about checking your breasts.
Yeah.
So we check our breasts. Who's checking their vagina? Are you getting the mirror out? She's
No.
cringing that I said vagina on the podcast. But here's the thing. How are you when menopause comes to you? How are you going to know if there's any changes in your pelvic floor or in your vagina if you don't know what it's like now?
Well, because I'll be living in what's the word? Denial.
Denial. You're gonna have your fingers in your ears saying la la la.
Basically, that was the plan.
I think that it's such an important thing that we all need to start considering is the responsibility that we have for ourselves, every inch of ourselves. And just by knowing, feeling, understanding yourself, you start to heal. A quote that I often say is, to feel is to heal. And if you don't feel yourself, not necessarily touching your shoulder, but actually being able to feel when your arm is stretching or where we're close together, that feeling is what allows us to heal. It allows us to identify what's different, what's changed in us, and then look for resources to support ourselves. So really, I know we're laughing and stuff, but I do think it's important.
That is so true, because I think one of the things I've said to you before is, am I getting stiffer or am I just noticing it?
Yes.
More. And as you're talking and even just saying about these things about, being stiff and noticing your body, my shoulders, a bit creaky.
And we're losing that sense of and feeling of ourselves. So that's called proprioception and interoception. There we go. And that's really what we can teach people in Pilates, is that ability to really feel and sense themselves and then identify differences and changes.
Yeah. And what about postmenopause? Is there anything that as women we should be thinking about then? And once again, how can Pilates help a postmenopausal woman? What would be the difference you perhaps see in someone that's experienced the menopause?
Relief. The women I know, definitely. And the women that I work, definitely, there's a lot of relief. There's also a lot of certainly I can only comment on the women that I work with, but the compassion for other women and a desire to share and support as well. And I think that really there's not a great deal that changes in terms of what we might do in Pilates, because we're just going to carry on doing more of the same. More bone density building, perhaps more balance related work, which comes with older age. And if somebody has a diagnosis of osteoporosis, for example, with that, sometimes what happens is the forward head and the shortened gait. And then when you walk with shorter steps, you're more likely to fall than if you walk with the normal gait. So we would be doing a lot of work on balance and lengthening out the gait, and obviously always everybody.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I really want to end this episode with Claire shares the 3 pearls of wisdom to take away from what we've discussed, that we can take on board at any age to help with perimenopause and menopause. What would you say are the 3 things that women should be doing, perhaps pre-menopause or perimenopause, and then afterwards as well?
First of all, talk to other women right across the board. I mean, really that covers, all women at all stages of life. Talk to other women about what you're experiencing, because you're going to be able to help someone else, and someone else is going to be able to help you. The other thing I would say, so number 2 would definitely be to know yourself. Absolutely learn your own body. So get the mirror out and check, just in the same way as you would be checking your breast. It's sensible for all sorts of reasons that we should do that. And then making sure that you include balance type movements, like we were just saying there with the post menopause, that if you could introduce balance type movements right the way through, then it will just be easy for you. So it's a future, I like a future. So it then helps you when you get to that later stage.
Brilliant. That's been so great. Thank you for all of those tips. And I feel like I'm not as nervous about it.
I actually feel better too. Yeah.
And we can start incorporating things into our lives now, and then when perimenopause and menopause is upon us, there's plenty of things we can do, some of which we're doing already. So that's really great. So thank you so much, Claire.
Well, we'll be continuing the theme of identity in the next episode, and I'll look forward to sharing more then. And in the meantime, do let us know what you think of this episode. Like, share, do all the things that you know you need to do to help other people find us as well. And we'd really love you to let us know if there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Thank you so much for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Okay.